welcome you here this evening. My name is Father Paul Tracy. I am the pastor here at Assumption. It's a privilege to welcome you to this speaker series. Part 1 is tonight. Part 2, it's a different part.
It is
tomorrow morning if you can join us. So you'll hear a little bit more about that. And we're just really grateful to put language around very, very important matters and ultimately how we see as God sees and as Christ sees in our response to that. And we're very privileged to have Dr. Kelly Johnson here. Dr. Colin Miller will introduce Dr. Johnson. Probably a lot of you didn't know that he too is a doctor.
There's too many doctors
working on Father. He'll be Father Dr. Colin Miller. But there's more. See, he's so humble that somebody has to say it. But we'll begin with a prayer, and I'm just grateful that you're here, and we'll open our hearts and our minds to the conversation. And let's start in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, Heavenly Father, we're grateful to be able to come here to gather and to just be open to your wisdom. We want to see as you see. We want to see the person, whether on the street, in front of us, in our homes, in our community, as with all the dignity that they are created with. We ask you to bless this time. Yes, open our hearts and our minds to your will so that we may have the courage to follow it and understand more clearly your love for all of us and all of those around us. We ask this prayer, or we make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Father. And thank you all for coming. Thanks to all the Assumption staff who make such an event possible, and especially my assistant Tyler, who does a lot of work and behind-the-scenes stuff with the center. And thank you especially to Michelle and the hospitality team who gives us our food so we have sustenance for the journey. So the plan for this evening is to have Kelly talk to us for 45 minutes or so, and then have 20 minutes or so for Q&A. And then again, like I say, tomorrow morning, part 2, different talk. Kelly said tonight's the bad news, tomorrow is the good news, or at least tomorrow is more of where we're going. So please come on back. So just a little bit about Kelly. I have known of Kelly for more than 15 years. We both did doctoral work at Duke under Stanley Hauerwas, but we didn't overlap. She finished in 2001 or something like that, and I finished in 2010 or something like that. But while at Duke, the name Kelly Johnson was sort of in the air as sort of a bright and upcoming and promising Hauerwas graduate, and she certainly didn't disappoint us, but I never actually crossed paths with her until recently when I got on the phone realizing that I wanted to do a speaker series on this topic and that she would be the perfect one to do it. She has, in many ways, she has much in common, sort of, with things that I'm interested in. She's written about and been involved in Catholic worker type circles for a long time, including founding a house here in St. Paul, the Casa Guadalupana. 20 plus years ago. The house still exists. She's been involved in the peace movement. She's taught English in Poland. These are not things that we have in common anymore. And she is a founding member of the Ecclesia Project. And back to something that we do have in common, she claims Peter Marin as her intellectual hero, Peter Marin, co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, and she's the only other person that I've ever met who does that. So I feel like I have sort of rediscovered a long-lost theological big sister in Kelly. So it's been great to spend a little bit of time with her today. Kelly has taught at the University of Dayton, which is a Catholic school, for the past 22 years. She focuses on Catholic social teaching, specifically on economics, and how the Catholic Church, or how the Church functions economically. But from what I can see in her scholarship, there isn't much that she's not interested in and isn't much that she has not written about. In the best sense, she is interdisciplinary, which just means that she recognizes that everything is connected. And so she writes and teaches on peace, nonviolence, just war, the environment, land and food issues, racism, suffering, worship, the list goes on, and how all of that is related to issues of fundamental moral theology, revelation, nature and grace, theological knowledges, etc. Which means she's interested in everything which is, for my money, the most important and pressing questions in theology. I've brought her here today to help us think Christianly about love of neighbor and fear of beggars, a spirituality of the common good for our streets. That's a wonderful title, and I'll let her unpack it. And it presses upon us the basic question about when we see around our cities, and also right outside the Assumption doors, poverty, destitution, people flying signs, asking for money, tent cities, drug use, maybe erratic behavior. What does my faith have to say about all of this? What difference does it make that we're Christians? What difference does it make that we all go to Mass and receive the body of Christ, and that Christ says we meet him in the body of the poor? We want to love our neighbors, but what if we also sometimes fear them? And finally, not to put too much into your mouth, how might the gospel change not only our response to what we see, but what we see in the first place, and maybe even who we think the we are? So, without further ado, here's Kelly.
Well, this is really great. You're a brave crew. There aren't many people who ask me to talk about this issue. So it's great to be here with you. And I want to start with good news. It is true that tonight's kind of the unpacking of the uncomfortable and difficult and hard stuff, and tomorrow is sort of looking towards solutions. But I think we always have to start with good news because I'm Christian, and the good news always takes priority, right? That's the truth. So first, some good news. Actually, the first good news is I'm going to turn on my clock so that I'm watching myself when I start. I'm not going to go on too long. Okay, good. So first, some good news. The story that brings us all here. The story is that every moment of sidewalk and pollen and puddles and fruit flies and orange peels and the stars and haircuts and traffic lights, all of it, that's not just a pile of accidents. It's not just one darn thing after another. Every bit of it exists because of an overflowing love. Creation ex nihilo is how theologians talk about this, right? The world doesn't have to exist. Nothing's here because it has to exist. Everything that is exists because there is this overflowing love that creates it at every moment. Creation's not about what happened way back then, right? Creation is still about what's happening now. Everything is held in existence because a source beyond us is so full of life that it pours out our existence as gift. It's like Every analogy is imperfect, but this is maybe helpful, right? God is the sun, the source of light, and we're not our own source, but we're all lit up. That's what we are. We're lit up by the love of God. So I want us to start in wonder and gratitude. This is a little excerpt from Thomas Merton that some of you may know, but it should always be heard again, about an experience he had. He writes, "In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, and that we couldn't be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of a spurious self-isolation. That sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being a human being, a member of a race in which God himself became incarnate. As if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me, now that I realize what we all are. And if only everybody could realize this. But it can't be explained. There's no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. And then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depths of their hearts, where neither sin, nor desire, nor self-knowledge can reach the core of their reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. But this cannot be seen, only believed and understood by a peculiar gift. So, if it's hard to believe sometimes that we are personally, individually shining like the sun, walking around shining like the sun, creatures made from love, it may be even harder to believe the other part of what he's saying there, that the fullness of that gift, of that shining, is in our relationships with each other. The fullness of that gift, of that shining, is actually in our relationships with each other. Let me put it to you this way. The story of salvation is a social story. This is my thesis. You ready? The story of salvation is a social story. I'm going to tell you the whole story of salvation. Don't be afraid. I'm a professional. I can do it. It'll be quick. So we start in the garden, and there's one creature, right? The creature made from the dust, and God says, it's not good for this one to be alone. There's got to be companionship. Right? The beauty of this creature is in relationship, so there have to be the two. And when we get the story of Abraham, I mean, Abraham's great, right? Is this one individual who's called. But the story is Abraham is called to be the father of a family and of a tribe and of a nation, a people. The story of salvation is about God giving revelation to those people about their special calling in the world. And their calling in the world isn't even just like that they can have a nice little group to themselves. They're called to be a light to the world, to take the law that's given to them and be a sign to the rest of the world of what it looks like to get it right. And they screw up, and then they get reconciled, and then they screw up again, and they get reconciled. But it's a story of that people. And when Christians tell the story of Jesus, we say what's happening in Jesus is finally the fulfillment of that call of Israel. Here's Israel getting it right in Jesus. And it's, okay, Jesus is different from everybody else, but what does Jesus do? He grabs these 10 people to be with him. 10, did I just say 10? I said I'm a professional. Let's try that again. Grabs these 12, right, to be with him, to speak of the 12 tribes of Israel, recreating that whole community around himself, renewing their call, fulfilling their teaching, so that that calling they had to be a light to the world can now be fulfilled in a bigger way. And recognizing the Gentiles, who actually turn out, in some cases, to have more going on than the Jews did, and calling together those people. And when the Holy Spirit comes, you guys, doesn't fall on individuals, comes to a community of people who then form a new community in Jerusalem who were assigned to people of some new movement of God in the world. It's a social story. And, for Catholics, we don't think of the church as just a club where if you like Jesus, come hang out with other people who like Jesus, right? That's not what the church is. The church is the body of Christ. It's a theological reality where the message is a social message. The life of faith is social. So I do Catholic social teaching, which is not sort of when you do social application of the faith, right? It is the faith. The story is social. And when we think about that amazing gift of the shining of the grace of God, the dignity of every person, I want you to hear that thinking, and this is a social presence, right? It's about the relationships that we have with each other and the way that those relationships illuminate the gift of God to all of us. Okay, there you go. That's the whole story. Okay, so that's a foundation. I just wanted to do that so we've got that, that's where we're all starting. But we do have to acknowledge, of course, we see, if you're paying attention, you may be seeing quite frequently the ways that humanity, it's like we're trying to scratch that goodness out of ourselves, right? Like we can't bear to have it, as though it's an irritation to us or we're trying to escape from it. Destroying that goodness in ourselves. We get this insight from St. Augustine that the problem is that we want to be self-sufficient. We want to be our own God. So we reject that fact that we're a gift from God. We reject that, we smother it under the weight of our own importance. We try to replace it with something that we can control better. Maybe it's a list of accomplishments. I'm a person who has a CV, very, very gratifying. Maybe that's the thing I can hold on to. Maybe it's a place you've made, a name, an idea you hold on to. We try to take that and make that into our source of stability. And it's a bad replacement for the truth, which is the beauty, the shining in us, is this gift that's beyond our control. It's even beyond our knowing, the gift of God. So the good news is God doesn't give up on us. God is not deterred by our struggles to receive this gift. How far will God go to pursue us, to stay with us, to heal us, to reconcile us? The good news of Christianity is God is all in. This is my translation of Emmanuel, right? God with us. You can think about this when you're singing, "O come, Emmanuel." God is all in, nothing held back. God doesn't stop, doesn't give up on us, but enters into the reality of our death and stays with us beyond death. I mean, ascended Jesus is still united to humanity. He stays with us. Through the Holy Spirit, God stays with us even now, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, till always. There's no limits. God is absurd in this way. We don't deserve this, but there it is. That's the truth of us. Boundless, self-emptying love. So our job as Christians is to hold on to the glad truth of that and to stay open to receiving it. And to try as best we can to make it easier for each other to stay open to it and to receive it. Okay, so heaven is a city. That's our call. It's a city where that love we have for each other and for God can be fulfilled in our living together. All right, but this vision, it can be very hard to hold on to. I got interested in thinking about begging many years ago because I was so often, and I still so often am, confronted by people in need. Sometimes people in visibly very bad mental or physical health. People asking me for money, and I don't know about you, but when that happens, I have all kinds of complicated responses, which are not those happy and beautiful things that I was just talking about. So just to kind of unpack some of those, some of the things I feel when that happens. Sometimes I feel guilty. Why am I the one who has stuff and they don't? I screw up all the time. How did that get to be the case? Sometimes, on the other hand, I feel suspicious of them. I feel like I'm a target. I feel like I'm being played. Sometimes I get defensive. Like, it's not my fault. I would fix it if I could, but why am I the one who's being asked to fix these problems? Sometimes I just feel fear. Is this safe? Is this a person who is so erratic that I'm not completely safe in this encounter? Sometimes it's more just frustration. I want to help. I would help if I could figure out how to help, and I know handing a bottle of water or a $5 bill, or this is not adequate to helping this person, but I don't know what to do, and I have a job, and I can't spend all day trying to figure out what to do about it. Sometimes it's a kind of a moral confusion, because should I give that money to like a social service agency, or is it better to give it directly to the person? Sometimes I give something and then I feel very self-satisfied and proud of myself because I'm better than the others because I gave something. And sometimes I just feel despair. I don't know what to do about it. It doesn't seem like there's a way to get this right, and so I just avoid driving down that street or walking on that corner again. Does this sound right? Something like that, yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but just to be clear, I'm not going to be able to fix that uncomfortable moment for you. If you came because I was going to tell you how to get out of that, I'm not going to be able to do that. For one thing, there are too many variables, right? Encounters are very different. People are different. People who are asking you for help are different. You're different. The places where you're meeting are different. So it's not like there could be a one-size-fits-all answer. But I also, what I really want to do tonight is, instead of rushing to, let's find the answer that will fix it and make it less uncomfortable, I want to stop and ask a different question, which is, why is this so uncomfortable for us? Why is this such a complicated, difficult kind of thing? A person asks you for stuff, why not just say yes or no? Why does this, and I have talked to a lot of people about Beggars for many years, and I will tell you, all of those feelings are exactly what everybody's feeling, right? I hear these things all the time. So why is this so difficult for us? I want to stop and spend some time unpacking that first, because I think when you come to a moment that's that complicated, it's better, rather than rushing to fix it and doing a bad job fixing it, that's not actually going to get anywhere, to take the time to try to figure out more truthfully what's going on. So that's what I want to do tonight, is try to do that work of unpacking what's really going on. And then tomorrow I can try to kind of point toward what are some directions we can move that I think help change that dynamic. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is talk history. Some people love history. I don't know, some people not as much. So let me tell you first why I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk about the history of the way Christians have thought about begging, a bit of it, some excerpts of it. And the reason I want to do this is because when we know the history, we can see, maybe it will help us be a little unstuck, right? Because it's not always the same. It does change. People do things that make these dynamics different. In different places at different times, it has been different. So if we feel just trapped and stuck in this, knowing the history helps us know actually things change. And people have impacted this, and so there's the possibility of change for us as well. Right? So that's why I want to do this history. Okay, you ready? Buckle in. Okay. So the first interesting thing about history, when you're thinking about Christians and beggars, is that there have been Christian saints who chose to be beggars. And it was part of their practice of holiness. This is very bizarre to us. Father and I were talking about there are still a few. You can find a few, but they're very rare nowadays. But there have been times in Christian history where the idea that choosing to be a beggar might be a holy path, and that wasn't so strange. Now, there are a number of these people, but let's just take the big guy, the famous one that everybody knows, Francis of Assisi, right? So Francis was the son of a merchant. He was an aspiring soldier, and he heard the call of God in a way that caused him to renounce all of his property, and I mean all of his property, in case you don't know the story, actually stripped himself naked in public to hand everything back to his father and give up any claim on property. Renounced all of his property and renounced all force, including self-defense. He was trying to respond to God's call. And it's interesting, I noticed today it's the Feast of St. Luke, and the gospel is one of the parallels to the passage that so moved Francis, where Jesus sends his followers out and tells them, go out as sheep among the wolves, carrying no money sack, no sandals, right? That's how you're to go out. And so Francis said, right, this is what we do. We give up everything and go out completely unarmed into the world to speak good news. So this is what Francis did. He takes up this life of complete vulnerability, which for him means the life of a beggar. Francis actually claimed in the first rule that he wrote for his followers, the rule of life, that Jesus had been a beggar. This is another one of those you want to pause and think to yourself. How many of us assume that Jesus was like a craftsman who had his own shop and had sort of saved up to fund his years of preaching and, kind of had a little nest egg he was working out of? Francis said Jesus was a beggar. He went out without any wealth and he relied on what people would give him. And if people didn't give him anything, then, foxes have their dens, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So Francis said Jesus was a beggar. Actually, Francis even said all 12 of the apostles and the Blessed Virgin Mary were beggars. Francis was really all about the begging. So what is this thing about begging? Because this is different than the way we might think about holiness. Francis adopted begging, and the people around him recognized what he was doing as holy. And it seems like there are a number of things going on in this. Some of the language that Francis uses very often is that this was a life of penance and that it was a life of humility. Those words are kind of painful for us. I'll say more about this later, we're a culture that struggles a lot with shame. So for us, I think that kind of suggests some sort of shameful self-hatred. That's clearly not what Francis was about, right? He has this reputation of being this incredibly joyful person, and people flocked to him. So it wasn't about some kind of shame-based self-hatred. I think humility and penance for him meant something more like the freedom to completely and unreservedly hand himself over to trusting in God, relying on nothing else about himself or about anybody else. To be open to that kind of shining of God in all creation, because it's not about him anymore, right? He's chastening himself so that he's completely open to the beauty of creation. For Francis, this was also in particular, a way to imitate Jesus, to be close to Jesus. Francis actually talked about being rejected as perfect joy, because this is sharing in the lot of Jesus. It's to be one with Jesus, and that is our perfect joy. He talked about this extreme poverty had us joining with the naked babe in the manger, the naked man on the cross, and the abandoned and ignored Blessed Sacrament, which was so often neglected in his day, that he was identifying with Jesus and entering into Jesus' life by stripping himself in this way. So all of that is important, it's beautiful, but my interest in Francis is a little different because there's a peculiar bit about his begging an even more peculiar bit about his begging that I want to focus on. I think what Francis was doing actually involved a social critique in his day. And this is part of why this movement took off like crazy, even in his own lifetime. He was critiquing a new economic form that was emerging in his time. It's called the money economy. Okay, don't get scared. This is not hard. Francis was not writing economic analysis. That's not what we're about. I promise there will be no charts, no graphs. He had this specific rule for his friars that they should not even touch coins. To the extent that there's a story where one of the friars had touched coins, and Francis made him put the coin in his mouth and carry it to a dung heap and deposit it without using his hands. Ew. Francis called coins flies. So he had some particular thing going on about coins specifically. So what was this about? Okay, the money economy. So we need to make a distinction between wealth and money, right? Wealth is the stuff like you eat good food, have some. Wealth is stuff you can eat, you can wear it, You could drive around town in it. You can hide under it when there's rain and keep yourself warm in the wintertime. Money, you can't wear it, right? You can't eat it. You can't live under it. I've never seen a coin big enough that it would keep much rain off of you. So the coins and the wealth are two distinguishable things, right? Francis was particularly uptight about the coins. Okay, so here's what's going on in this. People had been using coins already, right? If you know archaeology, there's coins in all these ancient civilizations. People had been using coins in Francis' day, but they used them occasionally. It wasn't the center of how they lived. So people are mostly growing what they're going to eat. They're shearing the sheep. They're making their own clothes. They're trading with their neighbors. They're living in a kind of a feudal setup where they give a certain part of their the crops to their landlord, and that's their rent. So people used coins, but it was pretty rare. Most of the time you weren't using coins. There were markets, but they were also pretty rare. They were like an occasional seasonal thing that you would get together for a market to do that kind of trade. And only very rich people were buying things that were traded from far away. Most people didn't live like that. But Francis was acting at the time when money was starting to play a much bigger role, coin, starting to play a much bigger role in the economy. And it really bugged Francis, right? This got under his skin. Now, think about, by contrast, for me, if I want breakfast, the first thing I think is, do I have money? It doesn't have to be coins, right? It can be folding, it can be plastic, it can be on my app. But the first thing I would think is use money to go get it. That wasn't the way people had thought. That wasn't the way Francis thought it should work. He was particularly upset about the fact that people are shifting toward using coins. So what the coins fit into this bigger framework of urban life, these continual markets, and the possibility for people, if you've got a society that's using a lot of coins, you can get up and leave your family and your land. I got a little pocket full of coins. I can go to the city and I can buy myself some stuff. I don't have to be in a relationship with anybody. In the older form of life, wealth was about the relationships you had. Who did you have a customary trading partnership with? Who was helping you run your farm? Who was going to help you meet certain kinds of needs? Who could turn this stuff into that stuff? If you've got coins, you can just go to the city and buy it from strangers. So what we're doing is moving from an economy that is much more relational to an economy that is much more transactional. Can be an economy that's about connections to people and an economy that's about trade with strangers. Now that's a big move. It happens over a long period of time, but as it happens, Francis is acting right at the front of it, right at the start of it, in Italy, where this is beginning in Europe. Now, I want to be clear about this. I'm not suggesting we return to feudalism. Okay. To say the difference is from an economy where people are relying on relationships, trusting each other in a kind of a stable set of relationships on land, to a kind of an economy where people are moving around more and less dependent on relationships. I'm not saying one of these is good and one of them is bad, because you can have really toxic relationships, right? So I'm not suggesting we move back to feudalism, but I do think Francis was seeing a problem in this change. He was raising a concern about it. And noticing this can help us to notice that our problem now is not that we have toxic relationships. Our problem now is that we don't have relationships, that we're strangers to each other. That there is very little dependence on trusting relationships as an ordinary part of the way we do our business. Our problem, if in Francis' day some people had a problem with being too tied to a place, too dependent on bad relationships, our problem is too much mobility, too much alienation, too much dislocation. And these are the things I'm referring to when I talk about strangerliness, right? Neighborliness and strangerliness. Francis was at the beginning of the move to an economy of strangerliness, and he didn't like it. So when Francis was forbidding his friars from touching coins, he was onto something very important. And for the first couple of hundred years of the Franciscan order, people talked a lot about this part of Francis's witness, that the friars were supposed to have no coins, and specifically that meant they were supposed to have nothing they could carry over from day to day. So one of the things coins do, I was saying they're sort of allow you to leave your place and travel around. The other thing they do is give you some security about the future. Some security about the future. Money can lose its value, but Francis didn't know from inflation. So if I have those coins in my pocket, it means I can, tomorrow, I'm going to get my lunch because I got coins in my pocket for tomorrow. When Francis said to the friars, you don't have a bag, you don't take anything beyond the day, you never accept money when you're begging, never accept money. One of the things he was telling them was, every day you go out vulnerable with nothing saved. And you have to live by trust that other people are going to meet your needs. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. It's a pretty austere life. But that's the commitment that he was following. So people noticed that and became concerned that Franciscans weren't necessarily living up to this standard that Francis had held. So Francis is refusing and causes his friars to refuse to adopt this sort of self-sufficient safety that coins represented. Okay, 12th century, confusing to you? Never mind, here's what you need to hold on to. It's just this. What Francis was doing in begging wasn't this exotic, weird sort of charity, holy thing off on the edge. He was doing something that was right at the center of the economic life of his day. And the reason it moved so many people was because they perceived it as connected to the way that they lived, to the way that their social order was working. They perceived that what he was saying was economic life, understood rightly, can be about our care for each other. Understood wrongly, it can be about pulling away from each other. Okay, well, you don't meet many voluntary beggars like Francis now, and there's a very good reason for that. As I said, Francis' order took off like wildfire, but with that fast growth there came some problems. I'll just tell you one of them. Those of you who like to know about unintended consequences, here you go. Because the Franciscans had such a reputation for holiness, all the wealthy donors started giving all their money to the Franciscans. Yeah, right. And so then you get all these complaints of your regular old parish priest who's starving because everybody's given the money to the Franciscans. So we have this sort of tension, and when we see this repeatedly through history, everybody kind of flocks to what's the new cool holy thing, and you pour the money in there, and then we have a new problem, right? Because all the money is being directed to them. At the same time, so that's where we get this kind of picture. If you've ever seen like the fat friar, you know, this kind of depiction of the jolly old Franciscan. Do you ever wonder how St. Francis had so many fat friars? Well, this comes from this, people were really annoyed that this order that was supposed to be all about poverty had become so rich. So on the one hand, we have the picture of this kind of hypocritical Franciscan. There's another thing going on with beggars at that point. Right? Now we're a couple of hundred years out. And that is that we've got this money economy going on. We also get the Black Death. A lot of people die. That's terrible, but the good news about a lot of people dying is hot labor market. Workers, right? There's demand for workers. People can pick up and move from where they were, and they can go out on the road and they can find a better job someplace else. So that mobility really kicks off, and you've got a lot of people in Europe wandering around looking for a better job. And a lot of the sort of people who wanted to hold on to the old ways were not happy about this. So they complained about these new wandering people out on the roads who were begging and disturbing the social order. Poor people traveling on the roads would stop and beg, right, to get by until they got to the next place. So these are these sort of destabilizing, dangerous beggars out there in the roads. And you get these two pictures put together of the hypocritical fat Franciscan on the one hand, and these dangerous, unruly, sort of social climber, wandering poor people who are beggars. These two images come together, and we get this picture of the beggar as dangerous, duplicitous, self-seeking, hypocritical, and that gives us the era where we start seeing a lot of laws against begging. A lot of policies about beggars needing to be locked up or needing to be authorized or needing to be regulated. There was a lot of concern that beggars were a social problem. And the theory of people who look at this history is you've got these two phenomena coming together that give us that kind of sense that the beggars are so dangerous. Okay, a little later, we're just cruising through history. You notice how I did all of salvation history in like 3 minutes? Now I'm doing like all of medieval European history in a few more. But so in the era where we start getting the economics that we operate out of, classical economics, so we're talking like 18th century, 18th, early 19th century, people who developed the sort of vision that's at the base, deep base of the societies that we live in. It's surprising how often they wrote about beggars as well. I mean, this is a thing that people are very anxious about. So our guy, Adam Smith, you probably heard of Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. He gets blamed for a lot of stuff he shouldn't get blamed for. But Smith talked about beggars, and he said, look, they've got a great business model. Basically, they're doing the same thing anybody else does when they set up a business. They think, what have I got? What do I need? Right? How do I set up the transaction? So they go out, they make people feel bad. The people give them money, they make the people feel better. I mean, it's a business model. You know, it's a little twisted business model. But as he saw it, that's how you understand what's going on in begging. There's no real anxiety in it. Why would you be anxious about that? If you don't want to do business with them, you know, go someplace else. But just a couple of decades later, we get this other economist, one of my favorites, Thomas Robert Malthus. You gotta have a villain you love to read, to pay attention to. Poor old Malthus. So Malthus was an Anglican clergyman. So he's ordained, he's a Christian, right? And Malthus, how do I say this briefly? Malthus didn't see beggars as people who had a smart business plan. He saw them, they were, in his mind, more like people who are drowning, and if you go near them, they're going to pull you down too. They're dangerous, right? They are, in fact, a threat to the system. And the fact that we feel compassion is a kind of feminine weakness, which needs to be carefully modulated. His worry was, if you give them stuff, if you let them think that you'll help them and you'll save them, they'll keep having children, which will mean there will be even more poor people and more people living in misery, and this is only going to make the situation worse. So you have to be very strict. Don't give them help. Make them sort themselves out. Let them know for sure they shouldn't be having more children. Malthus, of course, as a clergyman, didn't favor birth control, but he did encourage people to do late marriage, right? And to be sort of abstaining from having children, because he was very worried that poor people having more children was the problem he was concerned about. By the way, Malthus was wrong about this. We can talk about that another time if you want. I don't want that image to get in your mind because he was actually wrong. But this is what he was worried about. So he said, look, you can give help sometimes. I mean, he's a Christian, he had to have some kind of account of charity. So he said occasionally you can do that, especially if, somebody's had an accident, bad luck, whatever. Once in a while, but you don't want to make it a regular thing. You don't want people to rely on it. You don't want to do anything that's going to encourage poor people to think that they can just stay as they are and have more children. And the really terrible thing about Malthus as a clergyman, the really disturbing part of this, I'll give him credit for this. Malthus was trying to be truthful. He was trying to look things in the eye, not gloss over anything and come up with an answer. And he said, in fact, this is how God intended it to be. Right? That was his argument. That God intends there to be misery in the world because that's how God is pushing us out of our laziness, our sloth, our self-indulgence. So there has to be a certain level of misery in the world to sort of kick us into action. And we need to recognize that that's the truth and not fall prey to indulging it, because that's only going to make it worse. It's only going to damage our culture. So again, this is part of the sort of backdrop we've inherited of how we think about beggars. And I hope that it helps you to think These are ideas that were invented at particular times and places. These are not things that have been universally true, that have always been part of our history, our agenda, and we can think different thoughts. That's the point of looking at this history. We can think different thoughts, we can live in different ways. That's the first thing about this history. Right? I want it to mean for you not despair, but okay, those are the things they did. What are we going to do? The second thing about it is I want you to see that this anxiety we feel about beggars, it isn't just about philanthropy. It isn't just about something on the fringe of our economic life, about charity. The reason we feel so much anxiety about it is because it's actually much more central to us than that. That's why it feels so complicated and so disturbing, because it touches on questions about how we're actually related to each other very concretely, how we manage to make and distribute the things that we want and need, how we resolve disagreements we have, tensions, conflicts over those things. People were really ticked off at those wandering workers looking for better wages because they were changing the system. And it also has to do with how we face the uncertainties of the future together. And this is one of the things that Francis was really pushing us to notice. How do we trust each other with the future that we'll all share? But maybe the most familiar issue that it raises for us, and I want to take a little time to unpack this now. Let's see how I'm doing. So quickly, unpack this now, is that it has to do with what we think we mean by freedom. I intentionally referenced Francis as somebody who is particularly free, that's a way we can describe his vocation. But what do we mean by freedom? This is a very important word for our society. It's actually the center of the system that we live in. There are other things that we value besides freedom, for sure. Truth is very important to us, and the way we pursue truth is by saying everybody ought to be free to pursue truth as they can best see it and to talk about it as they best see it, and that will help us get to truth. If you want truth, be sure that everybody has individual freedom. We can say we also are very concerned about justice. What does justice mean? Well, in the first place, it means allowing everybody the maximum amount of freedom that we can allow them. That's how we achieve justice, right? Each person gets their own sort of individual control. We certainly value health, and we really struggle how to balance health and freedom, as we saw in debates about masking, about vaccinations. How do we think about that central good of freedom along with other things that we value? So, if you want to know what that freedom looks like, there's a very important, significant image of it that was offered by Catholic thinker Michael Novak. He wanted to describe, and he was describing it positively, he believed this was a good thing, that at the center of our society there is this space of individual freedom, and this is how he described it. It's a wasteland at the heart of democratic capitalism. It's like a field of battle on which individuals wander alone in some confusion with many casualties. Nevertheless, like the dark night of the soul in the inner journey of the mystics, this desert has an indispensable purpose. It's maintained out of respect for the diversity of human consciences and perceptions and intentions. So what he's saying is, we're so different from each other, so alien from each other, so at odds with each other, that the best way for us to live together is to be alone, to be strangers to each other. That's how we give each other room enough to be different. We are a far cry from St. Francis when we get to that point. So, what do we mean when we talk about freedom? I tell my students the important thing whenever you hear somebody talking about freedom is to ask who's getting free and what are they getting free to do. Who's getting free? What are they getting free to do? Whose freedom, when we talk about a free market, whose freedom is that about? And freedom to do what? The market that Malthus envisioned is a market where the poor are free to starve. Is production in the fields where U.S. workers are all too often denied water and shade, paid a pittance for hot work in the sun, is that an example of freedom? if I want to find out who made my stuff and how it got to me so that I buy stuff that's more just, if I can't get that information, how does that play into my being free? Right? As our friend, I think some of you know, our friend Bill Kavanaugh, he likes to say, the question isn't whether we should have a free market. The real question is, what would it mean to have a market that is actually about freedom? So anyway, Francis perhaps instinctively picked up on these changes in his day because there was a turn in social habits that allowed people to see themselves as more free when they were more strangers. Free to do as they like without the entanglements of history and relationships. They've got the pocket full of change. They can do what they want. That makes us free. We've gone a long way down that road from St. Francis. It seems normal to us to live that way now. And yet, when we encounter somebody in need, it touches this nerve off in us. It touches a nerve off in us. We haven't gone so far that we don't feel disturbed by this. Maybe we are connected. Maybe there's a different way this thing could work. But that is scary to us because we're used to thinking that anything other than a system of being strangers, of being private individuals who have our freedom all to ourselves, our pocket full of change. Anything other than that, we're worried might mean I'm no longer free. Right? What would it mean to be free if I'm also connected to other people and connected to people who are in need? Okay, other thoughts about that, but I'll skip on to those. So what I've been aiming at here is to help you to see that when you encounter a beggar and you feel, as I do, morally confused, troubled, unable to find a good answer, it's not because you have failed in yourself, right? I want you to know that. This is much bigger than just you. It's certainly not because the person you're encountering who's asking you for something is, as such, morally disordered or criminal. In fact, what's happening is that all of us, both those of us who have the wealth and those who don't, live in a system that makes it natural for us to be strangers to each other. It's not a failure of our system that happens, it's the basic structure of our system. So knowing that this is a matter of a social order and not just an individual failing, not something that you could sort of fix by finding the right answer, I know, I'll give them socks instead. I've tried that one. Knowing that doesn't mean that you should despair. All of this is about don't despair, right? The history should help you not despair. And knowing that it's a social system, that doesn't mean that you're helpless. That just means that the thing we need to be working on is bigger than just the question of should I give to this person or not. Right? It has to do with the bigger frame that we're living in. If we're living in a way that is defeating our very best impulses, then I think we need to be thinking about how to change that so that our best impulses have more freedom to work. We have to figure out how we can talk and we can work and meet our needs and enjoy ourselves and pray to our good God in ways that build different habits and different kinds of networks. Different structures. Our friend Peter Morin talked about building a society in which it is easier to be good. That's what this is about. God doesn't give up on us. On the contrary, God is committed to being right in here, holding nothing back. Our God is all in and with us. We just have to come up with a way to live that makes it easier for us to keep seeing that. So I'm going to stop there. I think that's a lot to think about. And thank you for your taking that long journey around with me. Good. So let's talk. This is very much an open space where I trust I'm in a community of people who can help sort these things through. So tell me, what did you hear? What do you want to talk more about?
I think what I'm taking away tonight is that we are created to be in relationship, and that the more we allow ourselves to understand about the people that we encounter that frighten us, and find the common ground closer to both kindness and solution may be possible.
Yeah.
One time lately when I bent down to the huddled person outside Walgreens and said, "Is there something I can get you from the outside?" And he said, "Something to drink." "Water or something else?" I said, "Gatorade." And so I spent 10 minutes, in the hunt and gather way that people do stores. I got him a couple bottles of Gatorade, brought them out to him, and while I was in the store, he had stood up. It was like watching a plant grow from being watered. And he said, "Is that your car?" I said, "Yes." He went over as I hit the open button. He opened the door for me and thanked me, and we were two people in a very different relationship than if I had walked by him.
Yeah.
I would like to do that more often, and I don't always, because I still wonder who's the person that I'm going to be talking to.
Yeah, I think another layer of the fear, I think this is a beautiful example kind of pointing to what can be possible. These encounters, of course, can go differently, right? And they can be very painful and upsetting experiences, and because people are people. And if you treat people who are begging as people, you're going to find they're as varied as anybody else is, and it depends what day and what's going on with them, what kind of response you're going to get. And so I often think of it as the challenge is to develop a new set of habits and a new set of scripts, right? So that I know how to I have a better range of options in how I engage people, and how to respond to the different kinds of things that people say to me. I think part of what I'm describing is a really reduced way of talking to people who are strangers. I mean, we have a pretty rich, I hope I can say this to you guys, we're pretty good at this domestically. Or at least we could be pretty good at this domestically, right? When you have families, and we were talking today about the most disturbing and disrespectful beggars in our lives are no doubt our children. And we're pretty good at dealing with it within the household, or at least we have a lot of scripts for it. I know I can make judgments when members of my own family ask me for help, even if they're asking me for really difficult things, right? I have ideas about how I can talk to them about, well, wait a minute, why are you asking me? Didn't you just ask me last week? Or do I say, yes, my God, here, you know what I mean? I have a kind of a range and a sense of when to give what kinds of answers. But when I'm dealing with a person outside in the public sphere, this is a whole different question. I don't have as fluid a range, as rich a capacity to engage in those things. And I think that's part of what you're talking about, right? You want to do this, but we have to develop the habits that will allow us to do that. Yeah.
Okay, like this? Okay, great. So I live in South Minneapolis, and a couple of my neighbors many of my neighbors are unhoused. There are two men. One lives in a doorway 4 blocks from me. Both men are profoundly mentally ill. I don't think I exist in their realm. I've greeted them but have received nothing back. They would never ask for help. I've never seen them ask for help. What do you do in that situation?
Yeah. As I say, there's a wide range of situations, and sometimes people really don't want help. Sometimes you can. I've had somebody who's in and out of psychotic episodes is very clear does not want to go to the hospital, has probably had negative experiences at the hospital, but I'm clearly not capable of helping him as he is, and so. As I say, first I'm gonna punt because I'm gonna say, wait, what I did was I told you I wasn't gonna be able to answer these questions, and so we step back and take this bigger view. But I do think the question you're raising points us toward, so how do we think about our obligations toward each other in mental health? is health to be treated as, we don't actually treat it completely as a commodity, but in many respects we do treat it as a commodity. It's not something that's treated as you have it in relation to your need. And so I think this is part of that bigger question. How do we think about this larger social issue of supporting people who are in very fragile situations? And finding ways to reconcile that with our commitment to honoring people's personal freedom, which does have an important role. It is a significant good. I'm not saying there's, like I want us all to become slaves. Obviously, that's not the answer. But finding ways that we can, in fact, reconcile those things, which is some of the stuff I want to try to work on tomorrow. Because I think there are ways those things can, in fact, be brought into better relationship. Yeah.
But the fact about what I think what you said is she recognizes him and you acknowledge him, and that's gift. That's what you're saying about relationship.
It is, but
acknowledging who they are.
It is, yeah. But for me, I'm thinking just last winter, right? I had a situation like this going on down the street from your guy who was sleeping at the bus stop, who was refusing help, and it was devastating to me. Devastating to him. He's out there in the frigid cold, right? But I don't think the fact that I went out and tried to talk to him, and lots of people, every time I went to him, there were like boxes of pizza, and people were giving him stuff. There was a brand new set of gloves sitting there that he wouldn't put on. People were trying to help, but these are individuals giving things, and it's not actually helping, right? It's not, at least it's not fundamentally fixing it. It's better than nothing. I was very gratified to see that so many people, in fact, were stopping and bringing him stuff, but we need to find a better answer than that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I find your talk to be very utopian in a way. I was an Obama fellow down in Tampa for a number of years, and I got involved with Hyde Park Methodist Church, which is a very upscale Methodist church in Tampa. And they are looking at the homeless too, and they've got a statue of a beggar on his side, and if you look closely, you'll see the wounds of Christ in his thing. So this is all very commendable, but what that church is trying to deal with is the Al Pacino phenomenon. And I don't know if you've seen a movie like Scarface, but the protagonist, poor in spirit or whatever, has no redeeming features at all. It's a protagonist that aren't any at all. And how do you reconcile the poor you always have with you from the Bible with this phenomenon of modern day underworld where people accepted a totally different code of the criminal code of ethics?
Mm-hmm.
What if the beggar accepts the criminal code of ethics? Well, how would you deal with that?
Yeah. So I'm gonna go back and take. I think I got like 2 things, maybe 3 things to say about this. One, the poor you will always have with you. This is a fascinating bit. I'll tell you how I read that. There is actually a text in Leviticus which says, "If you will but follow the law that I have given you and do this, there will be no poor among you." And so there's an element of reading this that says Jesus is saying, you guys, the way you live, you're always going to have the poor because you're not following the law, right? If you were following the law, that wouldn't be the case, but you're always going to have them. That's one possibility. Another way to think about this is at least that Jesus is saying to them, go and do it, right? I think when people read that as saying, oh, well, therefore therefore don't bother, right? Because they're always going to be poor and writing this off, right? That would certainly be a distortion of the text, either way. But the, second thing, criminality among the poor. So I'm not a criminal justice person. I actually have an office next door to a bunch of criminal justice people, but it's not my field, so I'm not going to try to describe criminality as such. I'd get myself into all kinds of trouble. I will say this. I think this is, like I said, I actually find Adam Smith kind of interesting in a lot of ways. And I think people find ways to meet their needs. And sometimes people do things that are illegal because that's how they figured out, the system's not working for them. They see lots of other people getting away with stuff, so they're going to do what they need to do. So so there may be criminality going that way. But I wouldn't, of course, jump to a conclusion that poverty and criminality are particularly connected categories. There may be cases where they're overlapping. There may be all kinds of those relationships. I'm going to talk about Greg Boyle tomorrow, who works with former gang members, right? So maybe there's something there about that. But I think the last thing, and this I think was really the nugget of what kind of the core of what you were raising, is aren't there people who just don't have the light of God? Who are not that kind of shining that Merton's talking about. It's just not there. I take it that that's a really core part of what you're asking. And I think Merton's claim wasn't that he was standing among a particularly good bunch of people. They were just whoever the people were who were around him. He was claiming, so Thomas Merton was a monk, right? But he would go out, sometimes they had to go do some shopping in Louisville or something and be out. He's just out on an average day in the street, and what he was struck by was not these people are good, but that creation, not because it does anything in itself, creation's completely dependent on God, but that creation is, in spite of all of the sin, shining with the presence of God. The fact that we exist at all means that God desires that we exist. And that's that amazing presence. And that exists because it's not dependent on whether we're good or not. That is the case for anybody, no matter how lost they may seem to be. So I think that's the answer that I would have to give to that. Now, how you engage that person is going to depend, again, on what's going on there. But I think the fundamental principle that there is nobody who is written off. It's hard for me. There are people that I find it hard to see that in, but that's the claim, right? That human dignity isn't dependent on our earning it or proving it. It's there because God has given that. People are people, and your encounters with poor people are as varied as your encounters with rich people, and some of them can be real jerks. I mean, I don't think we do ourselves any favors to romanticize people in poverty any more than you would romanticize anybody else. So, yeah.
Thank you. Just a question, as I'm trying to understand kind of what you present as we have this desire for the deep-seated desire that's been washed over to have this connection with the people around us and to have the relationship more than just the transaction. That would require a different format for society, or at least the kind of the economy, how we are getting the things we need for our lives. What about the desire that we actually, as we encounter those people in need, the desire that they would be successful in society? And I say that carefully. Just having a job doesn't make you successful, or having to, provide a good or service. Yeah. But I think there's along the desire to have a relationship with people, it's also that you want to see them do well. Does that desire fit into kind of this economy that you're saying we need a different kind of economy? Can we want that for people beyond just having a relationship? Like, we want them to get out of the life that they're in. Maybe that's because I perceive it as not desirable. Maybe that's not true. Is that clear enough?
Yeah. I think so. You should definitely come back tomorrow. Yes, I think these things are absolutely, and you're right. I think that's a good point. I should be careful about this because it can sound it can end up sounding sort of self-indulgent, right? Like, I want to have a relationship with you. No, well, I guess I can sort of tip my hand. What I'm looking at are models of economic life, or ways of approaching the challenge of economic life that are that bring us more into relationships with each other because people have power and are engaging each other in those, right? In those, so mutual relationships. There's nothing like sharing property with somebody to really find out who they are. Right? And so when we try to move toward a model that is actually about widely distributed property and more widely distributed power and responsibility in society, that helps us develop this wider range of scripts, right? Figure out how actually do I engage with people who are not my immediate family, who are not the people I love and care for, but are people I'm maybe in business with, or people who are in my city. We're currently struggling with how to do local politics with each other as we're struggling with doing national politics with each other. So trying to find ways that we can train ourselves better to talk about property and power over property with each other, on the assumption that that's actually a two-way street, that there is actually a conversation going on among partners. Does that help? That's kind of where my mind is going. Yeah.
So Kelly, my question is just a question of clarification. So do I understand maybe the gist of what you've been saying with the sweep of history is that we in our encounters with folks of all different kinds, and especially with beggars, one of the things that makes us feel so many different ways is that what we're encountering there is the fact that we are made to be in a sort of harmonious relationship with one another, and a sort of intimacy with one another. But we are so far away from anything even close to that, that all we're left with is a person that we have no idea about, asking us for something that is not personal at all, that we're going to have a 2-second encounter with and then go off and never see that person again. And so it's sort of, you've crystallized for us sort of what we're all experiencing in those encounters is the basic brokenness and fracturedness of our society. Am I getting that right?
We'll have to talk about the word intimacy, because I'm not sure that I would use that in that context. Maybe. So yes. No, I don't want to ask you to say that whole thing over again.
Yes,
Various thoughts were running through my mind, right? I'm more. I think a piece of it that I would add to that is that I want us to be thinking about the kind of formation I have myself as someone who is fundamentally shaped by a concern for my individual freedom and very afraid about any threat to that. And my individual freedom particularly has to do with my access to portable wealth, to money as security. I mean, never mind some coins in my pocket for lunch tomorrow. I'm thinking about my retirement, right? And we're in a setting where that's an individual question. We hope Social Security is going to last. God bless those of you who've got it. I hope there's going to be some of it when I'm there. But there's a sense in which there's a real fear that to protect my freedom, I have to protect my property. And somebody breaking the rules of that, to act as though this is a problem that we would sort of approach together or solving, it's a very awkward thing, and I'm ill-equipped to address it. I think we're ill-equipped to address it because we don't often think about that kind of connection in this society. So it has nothing to do with that personal encounter, but I do also want to frame it as we have a set of habits ways of thinking that we've inherited that leave us very ill-equipped to address. It's always going to be a difficult moment. It's never going to be an easy moment, but we're not well equipped to address it. And I think we can work on that.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.